Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, I want to have an in-depth look into Year 7, Season 1, as that is the upcoming season for us, and mostly the PTS that we have now is of the items and the changes of that season. So we are not getting the items and such and the changes from the DLC, which is, for instance, another exotic mask that we haven't gotten to play around with, and a new skill, of course, the smart cover, as was introduced with the recent videos. Those are not in here. Somewhat, some stuff is, and some stuff we have gotten to have a look at, but this is mostly the season stuff. And the season stuff, of course, is separated out, and also basically anybody who doesn't buy Brooklyn and will just, play the game without Brooklyn will still get the season things, and the DLC stuff is basically only attached to that. Everything will be timestamped down below, and we'll be concerning ourselves mostly with one big spreadsheet, as I always make for PTSs, with a lot of calculations and to make sense of some of the changes that are coming. We'll go through this whole thing. Everything will be timestamped, so you can jump around as you wish. And let's go get started. And for this as well, I'll link to the patch notes down below, as we'll go in the order that the patch notes are here, starting with the modifiers and then working our way through the gear and weapons afterwards. Of note, there isn't much in the form or any rebalances, which already not a big fan. I was hoping for some more rebalances, but at least with a DLC coming out and with a season coming out, I can understand that they're keeping the season simple and just getting what is needed out of a season out of it, and just working to hopefully make the DLC as good as it can be, and that we're not getting any rebalances there, because of course there's plenty of gear sets and exotic items that could definitely use a rework. But yeah, we'll go through it basically in the order of the patch notes. I'll link those down below, of course, and yeah, of course, again, will be timestamped. So yeah, let's go get started with the modifier. First, before we actually touch on the modifier, we'll talk about where we get some of the modifiers, active and passive, from. And they've changed the system a little bit with Journey as well. They have changed it quite a bit. So for instance, here, I've played basically the last 2 days, or well, 3 days, on the PTS. And as you can see, I'm mostly through the Journey, actually. Now, I haven't ran that many yellow builds because, for instance, as well, we're going to get, again, that 1 is unlocked, 3 is unlocked. Now as well, 7 is unlocked. And then once you finish 3, 4, 5, and 6, all 3 unlock. 4 is more towards red builds, 5 is more towards blue builds, and 6 is more towards yellow builds. Then also, actually, as they explained, but we didn't get to test that here because all of the modifiers are unlocked, but it seems that the passives are unlocked through doing some of the challenges. And they seem to be, without even really even reading these, they seem to be pretty easy challenges because I have them all done. So especially the first 2 seem to be the ones that would carry an passive modifier. So overall, the journey seems to have been very much simplified in, let's say 10 hours of playtime, maybe even a little bit more. Although I actually likely less playtime because I've spent maybe 20 or 15 hours on the PTS so far, maybe 5 hours a day or 6 hours a day. A lot of that has been working on Spreadsheet, so I haven't even been playing that much, and we're getting through here just fine. So definitely Journey has somewhat been toned back, which I'm for, although I'll miss as well having a real big grind, because I feel likely when this comes out, I'll get it done in a day or 2, I feel, if we're really going for it. So yeah, that is, and also now as well, it counts group wide, which is a very, very good improvement. Then if we go to the modifiers, and the modifier system of next season, and it's already caused some confusion because it's called hardcore. So a lot of people, there is already a hardcore in the game, of course, which is the hardcore mode, where if you die, you die. So a lot of people were like, wait, is this for hardcore? Or no, it's just called hardcore. In the same way that this season was called Rogue Momentum, last season was called Point Blank. This is just the name of it. And what it is centered around is actually some mechanics, or well, not per se mechanics, but just terminology that especially came from Division 1. Because, for instance, here as well, we gain, for instance, firearms or stamina or electronics. Although we gain tiers, which is kind of odd because those in Division 1, they were just big numbers, basically, or into the thousands. And what this effectively is at its core system is, depending on your cores of your build, you're already getting some tiers into each of these three. Then whenever you're killing enemies, you will gain, depending on some of their hostile modifiers, you will gain towards some of these. Although as well, some of the actions that kind of, if you kill with a weapon, you seem to gain a little bit more red than the other ones. They fill up to tier 5, and basically before that, the max is tier 4 before you get any kills. Once you start getting kills, all of them can go up to tier 5 and they can stay there. So the mechanic of this season is then also that you can actually have all of these bonuses the whole time active, or you can basically invest it in a one-time active modifier, because when you trigger the active, that is when all of those will reset to basically whatever the tiering you would be on because of your gear cores. I've already seen some people get this wrong with gear score. No, it's your gear cores. Basically, how many red cores, blue cores, yellow cores you have gives a starting number, basically, and then you get, as you get kills, they just kind of go up. Think of it as basically the kill confirms of the memento, where as we get kills and we pick up those kill confirms, although we don't need to pick up anything, it just goes up in tiering. Once it's up there, though, there doesn't seem to be a timer or anything attached to it. It just stays at that max. So you could actually, after kind of charging it up, just have the main bonuses the whole time, or you can kind of trade it in for an ult that just kind of triggers for, well, all of them seem to be 30 seconds actually. And then after the ult, it just drops back to those normal numbers, which is actually an interesting mechanic, because yeah, you can kind of have a buff that is kind of, that you basically have the whole time, but then also you can kind of, trigger an ult basically and just have a lot of damage for a little bit, but then you're kind of on, you're reduced damage after that. And especially it being crit chance. And then also one of note is that this crit chance does not count towards the crit cap, basically, or can go over the crit cap. So yeah, we can have 70 crit chance, or even much, much more. And also the good thing is that it's implemented correctly with the Coyote going first into the crit chance pool before this goes in. Because if it was the other way around, the crit chance of the Coyote would be wasted. And in testing, we have tested that, yeah, if you are, for instance, at what in the stat sheet would be 95% with some of these buffs and triggering some of the ults, if the Coyote was not activated first, basically, we would still see some non-crits. We don't see no non-crits at all. Everything's crit. And that means basically that, yeah, we're over 100 crit chance. And then also, yeah, we are over 100 crit chance, which, yeah, is quite interesting of a mechanic by itself. Then we have the ults. We'll, of course, have a full in-depth, the actives. I tend to call them the ults. We'll have a full in-depth going into all of these once the final version is in the game. What seems to be the case now is that there is also some trying to push you towards, especially with some of the actives, to try to push you to kind of diversify in what you are going for. Because, for instance, the weapon damage one, or for instance, this assault link, this is for every non-red core equipped. So, for instance, if you're going a red-blue hybrid, this will gain actually some weapon damage there as well. Although, of course, what you can go for is just on a red build, for instance, on a full red build, you go for the blue, you get basically a little bit more higher armor cap, basically. Or you go for some skill efficiency, for instance, also can be good, of course, for your skills and such. The multipliers as well here, they're saying multiplied by 4. No, this is multiplied by 5. This is 400%. Same for the passive. It is multiplied by 3. It is 300%, basically. So yeah, it is, or it is 200%, I should say. It is 200% a 3 multiplier, basically, right? So these numbers are off by 1, which is kind of annoying. There's also an issue with one of the hostile modifiers, which we'll get into. The passives, and as well, nothing in here is per se that strong. One of the things is, though, that there is definitely a weapon package, so to say, as we'll kind of look into the numbers in a second, where if we're just going red build, we're going to go with loaded up, multitasker, and the best kind of defense. And none of these 3 are basically as overpowered, basically, as, for instance, even this season's modifier. It is definitely not as overpowered as by the teeth of the first modifier season. And they seem to have toned it quite down. Although we can get, for unlimited time a really big boost to damage, but that's especially in the active, not so much in the passives. There's also no like CC like we have this season with microwave coils and such. There is none of that kind of built in. There is some of the passives that are more aimed towards, for instance, healing and such, which is actually kind of nice, although it's kind of hard to get to those tiers if you're just a full healer, because you still need some kills basically, although they are somewhat shared through group as well. So yeah, there is actually, the modifiers wise, kind of, there's definitely some interesting stuff in there. Nothing as OP as microwave coils or even or critical momentum as we have this season, and definitely nothing as much as there. The actives though do have quite a bit more power than, for instance, even overdrive of this season, and those hostile modifiers are actually going to be a foil for us for this season. As always, there's of course the enemies get something too, to kind of make it fair, because otherwise it would just make a power creep extraordinaire. And yeah, what they have is basically enemies will be marked randomly basically, and they can have multiple marks of a red mark, which increases their damage, which is as firearm marks. They'll do 10% more weapon damage and have 20% more movement speed. They'll have a blue circle mark for if they have this reduction, and actually no, this reduction stamina mark. They will gain overheal, so basically the Rager's effect. They have basically an extra health bar on top, but also the critical hit damage is reduced by 25% on this enemy. This also does seem to be actually that it's way more than 25%. I haven't gotten the exact mark yet, but in testing, it seems a little bit more than 25% of our crit damage just being affected. But then this is also just crit damage, kind of like if you're building into, let's say, pestilence sticks or let's say headhunter. That's the obvious one, of course. If you're not going for crits, this doesn't affect that much. Then the yellow mark, this is a little bit more complex. With the marked enemies, they take minus 33% from skills, minus 33% damage to weak points, so their weak points are kind of harder to kill, and they're just also against their skills. But then also, while their gadgets are deployed, they take minus 33% damage. This, though, actually is definitely incorrect. We'll show that in a second. But the marked enemies here, well, if they have, for instance, especially the RC ladies with the lawnmowers from the Outcast faction, they are basically always kind of, they have their gadget out, and if they have a yellow mark, you do reduce damage against them. Although in testing, and I'll be sure to kind of try to bring this to their attention, if we already go to kind of the spreadsheet, I'm already here on this. So we did some testing with putting some of these numbers down and taking them from in the game and such. And what turns out is that as I see that this one gonna get moved, as I was like, where is that other number? Let's bring that down. But the reduction seems to be, so we have a normal shot at the bottom, we have a reduced shot at the top by just shooting different enemies and trying to like see how much we are hitting for. This was with then a headhunter build, but the headhunters are not active or anything, so. How much is that reduction? It seems to be that we're getting reduced to 32%. We're doing about 33% of the damage, although this other one seems to be around 35%, so I'm not per se sure. I did a few others without like fully doing it like this, and they seem to be around the 33% mark. So we seem to be reduced to 33% and not, as it says here, they take 33% of the damage, because especially when enemies have that up, it very much feels kind of hard to kill them, especially as we can have multiple marks on the enemy, of course. And if they have a blue and the yellow and they have a gadget out, basically, it can actually feel pretty hard to kill that enemy. But I don't mind that either, actually. It gives a little bit of a challenge. We could always try to then destroy their gadgets to get that reduction off of them. We could be running builds that are maybe less catering towards crit damage, and we can work our way around it. And as well, you can still just kill them, even if it is elite, for instance, elite LMG with even like a tech tank, which is somewhat weaker in shooting. I can get them downed, but yeah, it does take quite a bit longer to do that. And I kind of actually like the choices here. We do have, you know, enemies that will kind of hit harder. So for tankier builds like Titans, for instance, they can be a nuisance. We have an overheal basically that just, yeah, deal with more basically. And especially if your build is kind of built around crit, it reduces more. And then this other one being also a reduction, especially for some of the enemy types that can deploy a gadget. They will, have reduced damage to them. So you kind of want to aim at the gadget. All of these kind of forcing you to kind of think about what you're doing at the moment. Because if you have an enemy where you could maybe destroy their gadgets real quickly, then it's maybe a better choice to do that instead of just trying to kill the engineer that kind of put it down. And that's actually all I want out of the modifier. Kind of changing up of how we play the game. And this modifier definitely seems to fit that bill. And let's then also actually kind of put it into numbers, as kind of, I feel that's what I'm here for, right? And that's hopefully what you're here for as well. This is on that big spreadsheet. Yeah, we have several ones to go through. We'll start here at the top with the modifier. They're all kind of labeled just underneath here, kind of what they're for. And here, of course, being the explanations for them as well. If we just take a Striker Obliterate with Coyote, and Coyote just in the right range for the whole time, basically. If we are on tier 4, we already gain a little bit of crit chance. Now, as we talked a second ago, the Coyote applies first, which is the right way, and I'm happy that they did it that way, because this would be an easy thing to mess up. But luckily they did it the right way, where the Coyote applies first. So here we're on 51. We're getting still 9 from the Coyote, and then the modifier is applying. So when we have just 6, we're going to 66 with tier 4. So at tier 4, we're getting 6 crit chance from the modifier. And we are going to 66. And actually, even here later on, in the stat sheet, it shows it on the stat sheet what crit chance and crit damage you're on. It's not like the Coyote, where it's a talent, where it's kind of going onto the bar, and it isn't actually showing the stat screen. No, all of the changes that these do basically all show in the stat screen. Same for the headshots, same for the weapon damages and such. So at tier 4, we're just getting started. We just have a build with all red cores, so we are on tier 4. Once we reach tier 5, we're getting basically a tiny bit, basically negligible, 4% there. Still an increase, but not much. Once we reach tier 5, we gain 10% crit chance, but also at that point would be the point where we start hitting some of the passives. The thing I didn't talk about the passives there is that they have requirements on being on certain tiers. So for instance, for loaded up that we have here, we need tier 5 on red, on firearms. That means that we can't have it at the very start. We need to actually go and get some kills, get it to tier 5, and then it actually is active. And then for instance, for multitasker that we're picking here, that one actually we need all of the tiers to be on tier 5. So especially if we use our active and reset everything back down, it's going to be a while till we have multitasker back up again. But honestly, I feel that for a large part of gameplay, we could just run with it all on tier 5 and kind of, the active is there if you're kind of, at the end of a session almost, and there is one big boss left, you just fully unload on him with an active. Because here with tier 5, just that 10 crit chance that we get from there on firearms, we gain 10 crit chance. We're going to the 70 crit chance. We're keeping the rest of our stats the same. Now, of course, here as well, we're actually on a 100% headshot rate. I'm actually going to change this already to 20% headshot rate, because that does alter the numbers a little bit, where we do gain a little bit less from our, we gain a little bit more because the pool is kind of less diluted by headshot. So instead of 5%, we're getting 7% if we're kind of on that 1% headshot. And we're going to keep it on that 1% headshot actually for the rest of this. Once we add in loaded up, which is one of the passives, so this adds 25% of your crit chance to your crit damage as a number. So we basically gain quite a bit of crit damage from this, especially when we're on tier 5, and we need to be on tier 5 to activate it anyway, so it's always going to be a decent amount. Once we're on that tier 5, this activates, and then we actually, this is one of the bigger buffs that we can get. Against the original, we are basically at 125%. So we're gaining 25% increase, both from the crit chance that we're getting and from the crit damage that we're getting. Then as well, on this right side, these kind of darker gray ones, this is all against tier 5 by itself. So against just tier 5, we're 16% more damage once we have loaded up selected. And this would be the instant go-to pick for red builds, I feel. Then we have multitasker, which also at 5 tiers, we gain at 5 tiers, we gain the weapon damage for it. Actually, to show it here in game. we need to be tier 5 on everything, so this will take a while to kind of charge up to this, but we gain 7.5 weapon damage, which isn't that much, of course, but we also gain actually a skill tier and some max armor, but especially that skill tier is kind of nice. Just kind of, yeah, well, it is with a condition, of course, but a condition we can meet eventually. With that multitasker in by itself, so without loaded up, so this is just tier 5 plus that, this just, yeah, bumps us up another 2.88% basically over that tier 5. Not the biggest buff, but yeah, the go-to basically, I feel. Then we have that last one that we were discussing earlier for like if you're going red anyway, the best kind of defense. Here we're getting a +5 headshot damage for every 200k armor that we have. Especially with a little bit of grading and such, you can get over 800k, and then what you have is, yeah, 4 stacks of this. So a little bit more headshot, that by itself, especially if we're just doing 20% headshot, is even less than that 7.5 weapon damage. But, you know, it's still a buff on top. And then the combined 3 of those, I'm kind of calling it the weapon pack. The go-tos for if you're just running a red build, all of it together is actually a 21% increase over, or almost 22% over the tier 5 by itself, and actually is a 30% in total. Now 30% is less than we have from this season with if you were at tier 4 basically, especially because we had rate of fire and such, and of course we had the movement speed. I will miss the movement speed quite a bit. When we trigger the actives, though, actually, if we here have it just with loaded up and then here as well with the weapon pack, we'll likely actually just look at the weapon pack one where we're basically doubling our damage versus our initial here. When we trigger that active, we are gaining a lot of crit chance because that is getting multiplied by, well, by 5 actually. So it says by 4, but actually the 10% is getting multiplied by 5 for 50%. The Coyote is still applying its 9%, so we're going to 60, and then we're going to 110. And we see that as well in the game numbers as well, so we know kind of that we are on those numbers. And yeah, our crit is going even higher because of that, because also, again, loaded up, then still just, you know, takes 25% of our current crit chance and then pumps it into crit damage, so we're gaining even more there. And yeah, when we do all of that together, especially even over just the tier 5, we're gaining 90% above it. So we can and this, of course, then kind of doesn't last that long, and then goes on a 30 or, well, in this case, 60-second cooldown. So this is kind of, and then as well, once that is down, we'll go back to this tier 4. So there is a trade-off with using this consistently and just kind of triggering it often and getting your usage out of it that way, versus maybe sticking on this tier 5 with that weapon pack. You can just kind of have a condition or like this 30% kind of going most of the time, or you can just, for a little bit, once you're kind of charged up, trigger for an alt, basically. That's why I'm kind of calling them alts here. And yeah, when that active is active, we're active and we're going. This could be, for instance, interesting for legendary bosses and such. I could see this being able to tear through something like Marauders and such. Is this too much or is this too little? I feel overall that, as with all of the modifiers so far, it's a little bit too much, especially this active. In a non-active way, I feel this is actually in a much more agreeable place where it is now with this 30%, and still a pretty big increase, especially because as the kind of like with this season, you got to respect enemies with frenzy. Next season, you got to respect enemies with blue and yellow, and if they have a gadget out. Those guys take quite a while to die. And yeah, again, to be clear, they basically can have all 3 on them, so they can also be doing extra damage and have extra movement speed as well, alongside of that. And yeah, it is, I kind of enjoy it. It mixes things up, kind of like with this season as well, where frenzied enemies, you just got to treat them with respect. The rest of it, you're kind of melting through them. Not having the movement speed in here, kind of sad, but yeah, we'll just have to enjoy it for the rest of the season. Yeah, let's go on to the next item. Let's head into the exotics. We'll start here with the Pakhan, or as I've taken to calling it, basically it's the Pakhan. It's yeah. Are you chicken or are you not? The Pakhan is not that great. Straight up, first off, it is an RPK. Here, of course, free third statable. I haven't actually changed this one. I should have maybe for here, but I've actually tested it with crit chance third stat there. Weapon mods wise, it is basically the same as the RPK. in going 2 crit chance mods, and then normally with the RPK, for instance, on a lot of setups, if we're going crit chance third stat, we would need basically just 1 crit chance mod usually with Coyote. So it would go with, for instance, crit damage. And that would be actually similar ballpark as this 5. Now, of course, then mod-wise, that kind of is there, but then the talent comes into play. And what the talent is each kill with this weapon gains a stack of 50% magazine size, increase to the next magazine up to 4 stacks. Now, an important point of order here is that this thing has a plus 20 round magazine here, and kind of in some other places where it doesn't account for any magazines, the same is true here. So it's taking actually 40 base, and it's getting 50% of that. It isn't giving 50% of 60. So I feel this magazine, at the very least, should be kind of, yeah, just make it something else. Because, for instance, as well, we could use here like some weapon handling. That would be maybe a trait to give it something. Because mostly what it needs is also a little bit of damage. But at the very least, it should be this 50%, which is now currently basically 20 rounds per stack. Preferably would be 30 rounds per stack. That would help it out quite a bit. Next up, it is basically an RPK in its base damages and all of its stats. Then if we actually take it to our spreadsheet here, I've made a Pakhan table here, comparing it on an Obliterate Striker here again, just for ease of use, versus some of the other choices we could have. So first off, of course, we're taking the Pakhan, and also then the Pakhan with the talent active. If we especially look, of course, at the burst, nothing changes because a magazine size change will only affect sustain. And in the sustain, we see that it is definitely an increase. It is a 27% increase if we trigger 4 stacks before we get the next skill. Although, of course, even that conditionality is kind of annoying because, for instance, in comparison to, for instance, this RPK, where we also have the base. So here we can actually see that at 100% headshot rate, the Pakhan is behind, actually. And that's mostly down to the grading as well. If we actually take it again to 20% headshot rate there, just to have more realistic numbers. The RPK base is ahead because of that 10 crit damage mod. Part of that is then, down to this grading. Grading as well will go to 30 for next season. So we are getting enough items to go up. Especially, of course, the damage mod here being, instead of crit damage, weapon damage. That hurts a little bit more to it when we are actually, when we have the grading on it. Because actually, at lower grading, you would gain a little bit more there. But it's, of course, they're very similar in numbers. But then if we take a fast hands RPK, we have similar sustain. Now, of course, the magazine size is going to still the same. You will always have to reload after 60 rounds. This as well is kind of considering the fast hands to basically always be not as max stacks, but the max stacks that the magazine can provide at 60 crit chance, which is 36 stacks. Which means that, yeah, it isn't at the, or well, it's 32 or 36. I don't remember actually off the top of my head, but it is basically counting for the magazine side of it. Which means that, yeah, it's kind of theoretical, but this other one as well. But then as the thing is that if we're just shooting at an enemy, let's say a heavy, we're still getting fast hand stacks. We might not get a kill to get a Pakhan stack. So I feel just even against the fast hands RPK, just mechanically it working differently is kind of hurting it. If we take it up against the killer, yeah, our burst of course goes up quite a bit. Our sustain actually isn't like it's halfway there. So we could go that. But then of course, if we're talking magazine size and such for weapons, there is one king. It is the Bullet King. The Bullet King can just, of course, not reload. there is a thing to say for just, instead of, you know, oh, if you get kills, you get some magazine size extra. No, Bullet King goes bird. Not that the Bullet King is that great. Don't see this as an endorsement of the Bullet King, but if we're kind of going for that, the Bullet King versus the Pakhan, just because the Pakhan is based on the RPK does have a better burst overall. It is one of the top bursters. The thing is, though, that nowadays the reload on such on it is so bad, and the reload on this is also so bad. It is a little bit better than the RPK because we're not getting that minus 10% we would get to reload if we're taking a 20 round mag. This 20 round mag, it being an exotic one, of course, is just plus 20. It doesn't have the downside of the minus 10 reload. But we can out-sustain the hell out of this Pakhan. The trait of this, of course, the talent is kind of a sustained talent. If we're kind of leaning in that way, I would be more than willing to give up a 5% crit or a 5% burst damage to gain even higher sustained damage, and then just also no conditionality at all. We don't need to get kills. We just shoot. And then also we get ammo back. For every 100 rounds hit, we get 100 rounds of ammo. Here, just to be clear, I did it both with crit chance and rate of fire as the third stat for the Bullet King. That is because actually with the Bullet King, it has a 15 crit chance. There is no real good way to kind of get it into the Coyote, basically, because we're either going with this 54.5 crit chance, kind of wasting it, because here we're just comparing at the 10 to 25 range, right? That first one, this crit chance one, would be at 54 crit chance, and then that means that also, actually, if we're on the wrong ranges, let's say on short range or on long range, it will perform a lot better than this rate of fire one. So don't let this kind of like fool you into thinking that the rate of fire for the Bullet King is better. Although actually in this case, just because we otherwise have to kind of waste some of our crit chance in the right range, if we're mostly staying in the right range, a case can be made actually for rate of fire for Bullet King. That's also why it's in here. But then also we could of course drop the Cheska chest that we have for Grupo chest just to get rid of some crit chance. That is this last one. It turns out that is actually not a worthwhile thing to do because it doesn't work out perfectly. Because even though we land then on 52 crit chance instead, that still doesn't actually work out against the rate of fire. The rate of fire still wins. So yeah, just as an aside for the Bullet King. Then as well, we have, of course, the MG5. The MG5 is basically the same burst and much better sustain with fast hands. I would just go this route. The Pakhan really just doesn't have a place to live. As long as there's a niche for a weapon, it can be made to do its thing. This, I feel, is competing with so many things, including as well the GR9. Although the GR9, I wouldn't pick it. If we're going GR9, I'm just picking the Bullet King personally instead with steady-handed. Even though steady-handed, of course, also helps your accuracy and stability, the Bullet King just outdoes it by quite a bit, and also has, you know, never conditionality attached to it. So overall, with the Bullet King existing, I don't think the Pakhan has a place. I think that, first of all, it should, at the very least, it should be basically a 60-round base, just so it takes 30, and then instead of going to 140, it would have 40 more, basically, going to 180. At least helps it out a little bit there. But maybe as well, per stack, maybe some weapon damage, or some crit chance, or some crit damage, or something, basically. Because otherwise, it just doesn't compete against the high-end weapons around it, which is quite often an issue for other weapons that don't have a damage shot. Next one up is the Nimble, which is the new exotic holster we'll be getting. The visuals are actually in the game here, as we have the look of it. The icon of it, though, is actually, there's a lot of placeholder in this, as we'll see as well in a second with the next one being Tinker. There's a bunch of placeholder stuff. Some of the stuff also doesn't have icons, for instance, where you don't have an icon for the talent here is missing. Keep that just in mind. That's not uncommon for PTSs to like gear, and for instance as well, the Brandset for this season is, or for in the PTS, is actually just group of models basically, so it doesn't work. But yeah, that aside, the Nimble holster. So this is also again kind of and throwback to Division 1, kind of in the same way that firearms, electronics, and stamina are. Nimble holster would just be a name for an item. So in Division 1 would just be holster, and then it could be like Nimble or Savage, or I should remember some of the names, but Nimble was definitely one of them. And then Nimble as well would be the talent. The talent wouldn't always align with the name, but in this case it does. So we're getting Bob and Weave, which we used to be called Nimble in Division 1. And it is a little bit different. It is a different percentage, because actually in Division 1, it is 2%. In Division 2, here it is 5%. This thing is maybe a little bit much, I will kind of say. Mostly because also if we view PvP stats, and for instance, if we then go into these, it stays the same. So quite often, for especially healing talents and kind of like armor-based talents, quite often they have different things for PvP than they do for PvE. In PvP, this is already like way too much. So for PvP end, this is because if you can heal yourself consistently, in especially conflict, you have 2 medpacks. Medpacks are actually valuable. Healing yourself in ways can be very valuable. This is not enough of a price to pay for what this is. On the PvE end, this is somewhat OP, but not really as well. You can actually survive a lot of things, especially if you make something tanky and you just put this on and just cover to cover and over again. That is in no way useful. That doesn't do anything for the team, for you, for advancing the combat or anything. Because while you're doing that, you're also not generating any aggro or such. So it's not even that you can, run between the enemies and they'll shoot at you. No, they'll shoot at your allies if you have any. Because you might not, because if you're doing that, they will leave. If they're smart, they will leave. Partially as well here, we have receive repairs of 5% of your total armor for every 1 meter run in cover to cover. So as we cover to cover, we basically have per meter, we have a 5% regen. This is quite a lot. I feel for myself that this could go down to 3% and still be very competitive. This should be likely closer to 1% for PvP, and that would kind of be the go-to. Also, any damage taken while doing a cover to cover is healed over 10 seconds. So basically, if you are getting hit, as long as it's not a one hit, you're getting that health or, well, that armor back over time. This is as well then also just armor. This does work in the DZ. I have tried it. This isn't just that it is there. One of the concerns we had is, well, maybe if this comes into the game and it has, blue core and, health and hazard protection, that would kind of suck. Both of the exotics actually are weapon damage, crit chance, crit damage, making them much more usable. If we kind of take this then to actually comparing this and how much would you in effect lose, for instance, in a build like this, if we drop the Coyote and we kind of go to a Nimble holster instead. The thing is, we've done this exact calculation before, and we have this exact same results in effect with the Exodus. So here we have the strikers in its 2 different ranges. We have kind of those ranges up here. Everything's comparing to that top slot again, of course. The Nimble holster, we're kind of giving up around 7%, a little bit less, 6.5%. Versus the 0 to 15. So if we were to be in the wrong Coyote range, basically, because both of them are around the same number anyway, we are basically more around the 4%. For the effect that this has, I would take the Exodus for that price, basically. The Nimble, while kind of useful, things like the Exodus can, for instance, give us much more utility there. When your armor goes away, you just disappear from the enemies, basically. Whereas this competes with just one of the simplest tools that we have, which is a med pack. Because in a game maybe that, is more like regeneration based, we don't have med packs, we don't have we don't have an instant heal, although we do, but it's minimal with the double tapping of the med pack. But we can just med pack up. We can just get into cover and med pack up and have similar results to this. And then on top of that, either have Coyote or the Exodus. And of course, as well, things like Bloody Knuckles can even exceed the increase that we get from Coyote. So this competes with a lot of things. There might be some places where we will find that like a use of like, oh, for this place, use Nimble holster and it'll do this. For the rest of it, I don't think being invincible is actually that useful, because they're also not per se invincible, especially if you kind of build it with blue cores and with defensive talents on top, you can kind of be close to invincible, but you're not useful. I don't want to die builds are kind of the same issue. So overall, I do think, though, that it could stand to have a reduction, especially for conflict. Otherwise, I see this as my go-to for conflict, because if I just have to cover for 20 meters and I get all my armor back, that means that all of those times where I lose to a second engagement because or I got some pesty ticks transferred to me and I couldn't heal that up, so I didn't. And then, at least with Umbra, you can kind of heal it up a little bit over time. If you're in high end, that's one of those downsides there. If I have this, I can kind of cover with it. And also, we don't lose too much damage with it because, of course, it is crit chance, crit damage. Let's go actually look at the much more interesting exotic as we go to the Tinkerer. And yeah, just to be clear on this, the Tinkerer here having the Catharsis view, and then actually even in equipping it, it looks like the Catharsis. This is just placeholder. This is in the PTS patch notes as well, what is placeholder and isn't. And what Catharsis, or what Tinkerer lets us do is this abridged. Well, actually, first of all, so the initial concern, again, always with the patch notes, and I wish they would just put that in the patch notes, because they've started to do it with the weapon mods and such. What is the cores? What is the attributes? Because when we saw the talent of it, the initial question was, okay, but what stats? Now we know red core crit chance crit damage, which is, yeah, the preferred way, of course, for it. We are getting basically, in effect, the damage ones that we kind of are one to go for. Then if we actually take it to its numbers, although actually no, let's discuss its talents first. So what it is that if your primary and secondary weapons are not exotic or named and of the same type, the secondary weapon's talent will be applied to the primary weapon. So if you have two LMGs, and that is the type, basically, if you have two ARs, if you have two SMGs, the secondary's talent gets applied to the primary. This isn't like actually like Alpha Bridge, where it was both ways. So you could actually, for instance, have, although there we also have multiple talents on the weapons and such that actually mattered a little bit. Although this is still annoying for friends of the channel that I definitely know that run their primary weapon is in this slot, basically. And it's kind of annoying that, yeah, it has to be on one, basically on the left side. That is the weapon getting the talent from the right weapon. And then, yeah, any non-exotic, excluding basically all the exotics, or named. Now, as you can see here, I haven't named here equipped, and we'll kind of discuss that in a second. But first, we're going to kind of discuss its numbers, assuming that that part is actually as written. Partially as well here. This wasn't in the patch notes, but this is specifically on the talent description here. Does not apply to talents that include weapon swapping. I can't really think of anything except unwavering, because yeah, we have other ones like finisher on pistols, but this is of course secondary and primary weapons. Now, of course, this could also apply to future talents we might get with weapon swapping or such. But yeah, this is basically just to exclude unwavering, which I can kind of get, although, you know, we have other strong talents. Why aren't they excluded in some way? If we take it to the spreadsheet here, and yeah, on the Tinkerer multi-calculator here, what I have here is, again, Coyote normally, the obliterate that we had a second ago as well, in its three ranges, just so we have that as our baseline, basically. Then we have the Tinkerer here. So we are replacing, and actually it's not the build that I'm showing there because that was OD, but that's for a point that I'm going to make in a second. But if we were to just remove the Coyote, put in a Tinkerer, take, in this case, Killer and Measured, and we're doing Measured first part and second part, and then combined, and then putting it all back together. We can take Killer on one weapon, Measured on the other. One of the things I was actually hoping for, and because yeah, that primary and secondary actually kind of caught me off as well, because I would have loved, for instance, to have both weapons kind of give their talents to each other, because then you can run, for instance, one AR at 51 crit chance, run the other AR at 60 crit chance. Basically, this one has like 2 crit damage mods, basically. This one has all crit chance mods. And then depending on, you know, if there is a Coyote in the team, because of course, Coyote group wide, you're not running the Coyote if you're running this, of course, because it's your exotic, this one. But then if there was Coyotes, you could, for instance, go to the other weapon but yeah, you still can. You just have to go into your inventory and just swap them around in place, of course. But here, then, yeah, if we take the Tinkerer, first of all, if we have the Tinkerer basically against the Coyote and we're not accounting for any weapon talents, but of course, then we're not accounting for the thing that the Tinkerer does, basically. But if we take it without any weapon talents, what we're basically losing is the brand or the exotic talent of the Coyote, right? So we're basically losing exactly the same as the Nimble we were discussing a second ago. We're dropping down to that 93% that we have here. Once we add in Killer to it, and then also Measured, we can have the combo of it as well, because we have the Killer, we have the Measured, and then kind of we have the combined versions here. Also, the Killer combined and the final combined here, I'm actually not calculating out from stats. We're just taking the average shots and kind of, you know, finagling them into position. But then as well, here at the bottom, I have Coyote with Killer active versus, and that's kind of the comparison that we really care about, of course, is the comparison between having Coyote with Killer and having Killer plus measured on Tinker. And yeah, it should be no surprise because especially Coyote is powerful, but isn't measured powerful or Killer powerful. Because here we're getting measured on top, basically, we're getting measured instead of basically the Coyote talent. Those two are basically in opposition to each other. And yeah, the Tinkerer will be ahead when Killer is activated, and both on burst and sustain. It is a decent increase. Now, of course, in group settings and coordinated teams, we'd still want one Coyote. What this especially then is as well is just if you're as the replacement piece, like sometimes we would put Grupo or Fenris in, that's basically a non-starter at this point. It is either going to be this, because you would go just with this, or still the Bloody Knuckles, as that is competitive. But then as well, so here this black one, this is the Coyote versus the Tinkerer with Killer and measured. So with both of those talents up, both having Killers up, it is a 96%. Now this does shift a little bit if we put it at a 20% headshot, because of course the pool of crit is much bigger in the Coyote one, basically. So it does catch up a little bit if we put it at 20% headshot rate. So we're kind of, not diminishing crit plus headshot that much. So it is within 2% basically of each other in the right range. When we're on the wrong range, we're losing another 3%. So it is not that humongous of a difference, especially with Killer and measured. But then, yeah, as we'll show in a second, there's of course other talents than that. But just for a red build, because on a Coyote, there isn't that much, or on a striker, there's, those are the top picks overall. Then as well, actually, one of the things we can do, and that's actually the way I'm likely going to run my one, is that, although here we're not even on striker, but on the secondary, I might just go with a preservation weapon, or a future perfect weapon, or a fast stance weapon. Because how nice is it to just have fast stance and Killer at the same time? Like that sounds actually pretty appealing. If we give up basically one of the damage talents, that is this last one here basically, then the Coyote is actually ahead. If we're just taking one damage talent, the Coyote obviously is going to be ahead because we're not putting a utility talent basically versus the Coyote's talent. And then basically the 7% is actually also the 7% that we have over the talent not being there, right? But this is still a really interesting thing where we can have a utility talent, especially consider as well, yeah, future perfect or such, with a shield. You can get some tiering in there and you can still have Killer. And as once it works as intended, let's say it like that, it will be really good for things like this. But there is one big but, and yeah, this but is so big it might be not safe for work. So yeah, maybe skip this one if you're. But yeah, no. This is one of those buts that I'm kind of surprised again that the QA of even this being in the PTS is kind of annoying to me. Because Tinker allows named and perfect talents. It shouldn't allow names. Now, of course, initially as well, there was the thing of like, oh, Lexington works at least. So what does that mean? I would think that they were intending at least perfect talents in that case. But that protection is not there at all. Now, I hope this is just a PTS thing. This isn't in the known issues. There is some things of known issue in here, which is, for instance, that Streamline doesn't work with it and Perpetuation and some others. But for instance, here, taking the same non-normal talent does not stack, neither do two perfects. So if we take two Carnages, for instance, we can't do double perfect Sadist. If we take two normal weapons with Sadist, we can't have that. But a normal and a perfect do currently. So that's actually why I was also on this build. OD here with a weapon with Sadist, here an MG5. A weapon that I actually much more prefer to use than the Carnage, for instance. So we can get the Carnage talent over to it. I feel that's a good deal. This shouldn't work, of course. This is blatantly against the terms of this agreement. But that it works is also actually gives us one interesting thing. So let's touch on that first. So if we take if we just take the secondary being Sadist, and the first one is, for instance, something non-damaging, Not per se doing a calculation here, but just the hit and then versus this other hit, basically, with hollow points on, of course. So if we have that second weapon be perfect sadist, which shouldn't work, it works. But then actually we see an interesting interaction, especially for, you know, we kind of always talk about amplifies being like self-multiplicators and stuff. Behind the scenes, they're just, again, they're just stat pools. And this kind of shows that in a way, because this is then sadist main plus sadist secondary, although actually perfect sadist secondary. So having the carnage and kind of the setup we had there with these weapons, then first doing just basically equipping a fast lance weapon first and then just getting first the perfect sadist again. But if we then go to double sadist, we get a 65% increase. So it's a 30 plus a 35. So they're actually not multiplying against each other the way, you know, amps would generally do. No, these are stat pools again. They're just normally single source. Glass and stuff as well, kind of. We know that they work behind the scenes like this from back in the day with the damage glitches. But here we're getting a 65% by going two sadists on top of each other. Now this, of course, totally unintended, but currently possible and currently very OP. This should not go into the game like this. This is just broken. This should go through QA. Of note as well, then here the mask itself will be the item because we have 3 exotics. One of them will be attached to the climax mission as always. That will be the mask. We have confirmation of that from Yannick himself during a recent live stream. So they have a few months to fix this because this will go to be the item that we get once we have gone all the way through all the scouts and actually reach the climax mission, and then it can drop in the normal version of it, but is a guaranteed reward from a master. Overall, this is a very interesting item. I'm actually all for this overall, if it works as intended, so we can go double talents. It is still a little bit too powerful because even without going perfect sadist, for an OD, this is no contest because we're going sadist and pressure point. Depending on the talents available for the build and what talents can interact well for it, there can be two powerful combinations. But overall as well, I feel that because yeah, that would just be a big buff to OD. OD would maybe even kind of come closer to to strikers basically, and I'm not against that per se. Some other gear sets might actually even have similar combos and such. Overall, I think this is a really good choice, and also the choice of going triple reds. It kind of had to be this way, because also if the second we give up maybe one of these for weapon handling, for balancing purposes, it kind of falls a little bit too far behind to be actually useful. So then it might not just see that much use. But overall, I feel actually what I will end up with is quite often, well, once we have it, even going, yeah, one utility talent. Like if I can have fast hands plus and say this, I feel that is much more of a useful thing. Now, of course, this also will work for determined, for instance, and yeah, determined preservation and such could be pretty OP preservation, or also determined plus, you know, ranger, of course, or determined plus lucky shot and such. I don't think it's that useful actually for those kinds of builds overall, because determined already does what determined does, but this has actually some utility here and there. But yeah, they do need to fix it. They do need to give it that it does what it says on the tin. And also, yeah, actually being a part of the master or part of the climax missions, I'm actually not too against that. We're going to get a lot of toys at the start of the season. We're also going to get a DLC at the start of this next season. There's a lot of stuff to play with anyway. And we have a little treat waiting for us for, you know, in a few months afterwards, where we get finally the Tinkerer with the climax missions, and actually a very interesting item. And let's go into our next one, which is Imminence Armaments. Yeah, definitely one to annoy anybody with a lisp, because I feel that's gonna suck to say, or just, yeah, she sells Imminence Armaments by the seashore. Overall, what we're getting here is a Brandset, 5% weapon damage first piece, 100% increased threat, and that's actually an interesting one, of course, not a stat we've had before, and 60 pistol damage on the 3-piece. The 60 pistol damage is kind of similar to Lengmo, of course. We're getting basically the triple of a 1-piece in DNH, and this does open up a few possibilities, and maybe even too many, for some pistol builds, of course, because this will affect kind of all pistol builds. Now, there's, I would say, 3 kinds of pistol builds. There's the Headhunter's Fury, there is the high-end Headhunter, both with either Regulus or Harvest, and then there is basically going crit chance, crit damage, and just playing shooty builds with pistols, basically. All 3 kind of styles of builds have actually been touched by this. Here I'm on the Headhunter's Fury. One of the things with Headhunter's Fury, yeah, we would need it to be ninja biked if we want that 3-piece, of course. But this does actually open up some possibilities for this. First of all, again, the icon of it is Shiny Monkey. The visual of it is a Grupo. So yeah, those are all placeholder for the time being. It does come with a red core, first of all, because yeah, that is actually kind of handy, making it, because I was kind of afraid that an item like this with weapon handling headshot, if this was a blue core item or a yellow core item for some reason, well, this would have been a new super unicorn to get. But it is red. It is actually pretty easy to just get this crafted, although especially more the other ones. It still, you know, might take you a few crafts or a few farms here and there. But then, especially what we're going for then is this 60 pistol damage. Is this 60 pistol damage in general worth it? Somewhat, because yeah, what you can basically see it as, just with the threat and stuff and the weapon damage. Well, the weapon damage is also a bonus, but just kind of saying with lane mode, throw those out. Just see this 60 as a 20-20-20, right? We have 20-20-20, although this first one is even 25 basically. And that turns out to be well worthwhile. So going back into the spreadsheet here, what we have here then is, yeah, again, that ninja, basically with that 2-piece Imminence Armaments, and then 3-piece Hunter's Fury. Then we have 2 mementos versions here, one with 0, one with 30 stacks, basically. So the memento starting up and the memento being at full charge. Now, of course, yeah, the memento does need to kind of charge up. Once it charges up, we also have armor regen, we have shield, higher shield, for instance, health because of the skill efficiency and all of those things. So there's other benefits than just damage as well to the memento. But that's also somewhat of a downside because you can't fast travel to any safe houses and such, which is actually quite annoying. So with the ninja button, we're just at this, even if we go to the safe houses and such, or we, you know, have to jump to New York for priority objectives, there is no kill confirms to lose. There is no memento stacks to lose. So there's benefits there. And especially, yeah, with that setup as we had it there, here as well, we have the values for enemies, basically the same as that MMR kind of set that we had. So we can see that all of the setups, even the memento 0 stacks, has more than enough to start on a red. Because of the increases as well that we get once we have a Headhunter stack stored up, we have more than enough for the second shot to be a purple, especially with the Regulus. Here as well, though, this is a Regulus with grade 30, and again, yeah, we're getting grade 30 with next season. There's enough items there. And then from the third shot onwards, they can all go to basically an elite. So what this basically can get you is kind of in the same way with the Headhunter tech tanks, for those familiar with those. There's a memento version, there's a ninja bike version. The ninja bike version does actually have some benefits a little bit when it comes to just, yeah, not having to deal with memento stacks. It is always on that one. But also that one, because it is using Zvia, it is actually getting a ton of weapon handling. Here we're getting increased threat, basically in that same slot. That is completely useless if we're solo, basically. Although, actually, if you're using a decoy, for instance, I'm going to guess that it actually will affect that. Also, we will discuss a little bit what that increased threat does a little bit later on. But yeah, overall, we can get a decent enough setup here with this ninja bike version that we can start basically on a red. Because actually, if you go with other setups that were, if you were to go with, for instance, having Chain Killer plus a piece of DNH, generally still would be the second piece. You would gain accuracy, for instance, but you wouldn't gain actually up to this point. You wouldn't be able to start on red with a ninja bike. So this does actually unlock this kind of. Overall, I do think that actually this setup with the ninja bike that I have here, this will likely go into the build collection as is. I've been playing around with it. I've enjoyed it quite a bit. Not having that charger of not having to deal with memento stacks is actually a boon. But then, of course, that comes with a downside as well of, yeah, we don't have the regen and such for memento. But as a counterpart, actually works pretty well. And then if we also go and look at the high-end version, there's, of course, an obvious way to kind of set it up. Is if we want to keep the Dodge City especially, we're going with a still a punch drunk, Fox Spur, and then chest, backpack, gloves being this Imminence armaments pieces with the Dutch City. This is then, of course, a high-end setup. Normally, now, the normal version, as I'm going to call it in a second, we still have it saved here, basically, or no, here. No, here, which is with Chain Killer, Contractors, Fox's Prayer, Punch Drunk, Gift, and then the Dutch City Holster. This older version, or well, I'm going to kind of call it the older version because it's going to likely become the older version. This is the second set. So if we have the high end here with the three-piece Imminence Armaments, and then versus the classic version, what we have especially is on the first shot, we do gain quite a bit. Now, it isn't actually in a meaningful sense because this doesn't help us in really any way. We are still two-shotting a purple. We're still one-shotting in red. But especially what the high-ends already had as well is actually on the second shot, they can go to an elite because an elite is basically this 9.89, especially about assaulter and grenadiers and such. Both of them already had that. This one then, versus the classic, because of the chain killer, actually the second shot is actually ahead. The first shot is of course behind. It also means it reaches its cap a little bit faster, but then especially this cap is because of its pistol damage versus, what we had in DTA, although the weapon damage of the chain killer would count, but then also the headshot from the gift. All of those are kind of, not going into headhunter basically. And the cap shot is way lower versus 60 pistol damage. So what we especially gain there is a higher cap shot. Does this matter? It turns out that it basically does because it is actually just, and I mean just above, because I had to actually go get the full value, the raw value of what a named actually, an assaulter named or such would be, because for instance, LMG names have more than this, sniper names have less than this, Russian names same as well. But for assaulter waves named, they are basically just 400-ish, 300-ish something behind. Just, is it true this one less than this one? Yes. So you can just barely reach the point where you can drop one of those names. Overall, there is actually a little bit of a benefit there. Is this actually worthwhile? Overall, I would say that it is also easier to get pieces. So if you're making it anew, I would just go with that. You also gain, basically, because we're trading in one DTA for one weapon handling in effect, because we're not taking the contractors. We're gaining a weapon handling as well on top of this. So overall, I think that is the way to go. So I don't think we're going to keep going this route. I'm going to actually, on the build collection, likely swap over to this, depending on if it actually goes into the game, of course, in this way, because everything is subject to change on the PTS. 60 pistol damage, I feel, is actually maybe a little bit too much. Dropping it to 50, I feel, brings it a little bit more in line. You do still get some benefits from it, especially if we're comparing it on, for instance, the Ninja one, especially that I read earlier. That one is enough ahead that this might be a little bit too much. But especially in this one, it's kind of head-to-head, and it's kind of a moot point anyway, because, we're just getting one weapon handling basically out of it. Versus what we had before, around the same damages. Then lastly, actually, what I wanted to talk about is that, we do gain actually one benefit as well from here, and that is that in the past, we did have a decent way to go memento for even the high end, but that was centered around having a clause out, honestly, because you would have Chain Killer, Contractors, Fox, and Punch Killer. And then basically the gift would go out here, replaced with the memento, and then the holster would become a clause out with a headshot stat. And you had to get a headshot stat one and red quarter to actually be valuable enough. And that would be ahead of anything else that you could put in that slot. Now we have basically the three piece of this. So we can go Punch Drunk plus Fox's Prayer and then this. And actually, I think this also maybe has some value. Already it's a memento version. I always like them because especially in solo play, you can have a much stronger shield and just the regen and such is actually very nice. So first of all, we're actually looking at, for instance, replacing in different ways, and especially removing the Dutch City Holster. Although in the high end, the thing for me with the high end especially is I like it a lot for its ability to have the Dutch City Holster without giving up too much else, because especially on the high end version, you basically have to give up the backpack slot, or in the Hunter's Fury version, you have to give up the backpack slots basically to get the hunter or a headhunter chest and the Dutch City. In the high-end one, of course, you don't need to do that. But of course, yeah, with both of these as well, we can actually gain more if we're going with the contractors, and then losing the Dutch City basically, or going with Chain Killer. Both of those, of course, giving their bonuses, because the Dutch City, of course, has a really high first shot if you're doing it Sting. But if you're not doing it Sting, maybe you can give it up. I really do enjoy having it. Then we have here as well the classic, then with the Eagle as well, as another option. And that one as well would be much lower, but Eagle then would get you, one more shot into the magazine, and you would also gain the weapon handling from Eagle's Grasp. So we don't have per se the Memento one in here, but overall this still does do decent. This can start on a red, even uncharged. And I think, for instance, with the high-end, something like this would maybe be something that I add into the build collection. Overall, I think Imminence Armaments, especially for its pistol parts, is very powerful. Let's actually, before I forget, let's go look at one last one, because as I alluded to a little moment ago, there's actually a third one, of course, that also kind of gets affected by this. And that is any high-end, or like this setup of a high-end tech tank with pistols that I kind of have in the build collection as well, and quite enjoy, especially for like 7 directives summit, without having to per se go like Headhunter and such, because my jam is more just shooty builds. The obvious thing to go for, and this will definitely change in the build collection the coming season if the stats stay the same, is that we'll go to this basically, because of course that 60 pistol damage by itself is a lot, quite a bit. It beats having that core, basically that skill tier core, come from the Picaro's 2-piece together with the piece of Brazos. It's more than the Grupo piece there. We're basically dropping all those, and we're taking these 3 pieces. And then we're taking one more blue core basically to make up for the 2-piece Brazos that we had earlier, because the other version, the previous version, was basically with the Picaros and a Brazos piece for that extra skill tier, because that helped out a little bit. That means that our shield is still 6 skill tier, but our hive is actually now 3 skill tier. So it used to be 3 yellow, 3 blue basically for the shield, and then 3 yellow for the artificer. That is now just the 2 yellow basically, one from the Memento and one from Technician. So we're kind of changing as well there, but actually the shield was never a problem how chunky it was. It was mostly as well. The Picaro's setup was overall the more damage, and even with the changes to the Picaro's, mostly because that one skill tier basically bought us 1 core. So we do have to 1 core more. Here as well, we're going for some blue core items. Actually, I needed to only craft a few dozen, or in total for all 3 pieces, because these aren't unicorns per se, they are red core, so we are getting them mostly with red stats. Getting one with crit chance, crit damage to optimize that is not too hard, especially if we're not going for a chest piece or something. Then actually, how much do we gain when we swap these out? And this is again one of the places where I go like, maybe this should be 50 instead of 60. And that is, for instance, in this, the first one is the original one, the older one, and this is then now with Imminence Armaments. We're gaining 13%. That is quite a bit in our damage output. Of course, this build is not set up to do that much damage here as well, but grade 30 with Memento stacks all the way in, with Intimidate triggered. We don't actually have Killer triggered in here. We could have then added that in as well, because that's actually kind of the thing of that build. What I used this build for as well a little bit is actually we went into some legendaries and played around with the second piece that was increased threat, of course. Now, this build doesn't do that much damage, especially if you compare this number basically towards 16, 17 million of a Red Striker at full blast. That's basically double. It isn't no damage, but this normally does not do enough damage to, for instance, if we were to run it in a legendary, and I've somewhat tried, not with this specific build, but in previous incarnations, to try to, run at the enemies, kind of try to get them to aim at me, basically. That doesn't really happen. The second someone with real firepower kind of shoots at whatever target I was trying to keep on me, although we can go mosquito and such, that would kind of wean off, basically. Now, though, having gone through a little bit of a few missions and run around with it, I do notice that a lot more enemies do target this build. And that is likely due to that increased threat. Because one of the things that could be here as well is that the increased threat is just not active. We've had that before with, for instance, Rugged. It came in the first PTS. Its stats were not on, so everybody thought it was really bad, and then they fixed its stats, and it was just bad. But in this case, yeah, it definitely feels as if more targets are aiming at me. Now, I haven't tested this that in depth. I'm honestly leaving it more so for once the main game comes out, and then we'll maybe really look into threat and such and try to kind of explain it a little bit better. But overall, there is definitely a difference there. Running especially also the older version versus the newer version, I noticed, yeah, the threat difference was definitely there. And then, yeah, here we're also then getting this. So this could, for instance, yeah, fit in decently well with also trying to get that pistol with a bulwark. Let's say maybe even having a foundry version with, 2-piece and then 3-piece foundry and then ninja bike version. Or even, and then, for instance, yeah, going with a pistol and a bulwark just to get that aggro, because definitely the aggro increase is there. Here, though, yeah, we're also gaining some damage here. This is, as if it comes into the game, this is slated to kind of replace the older version. With the Headhunters, the old version, if you have it, I think you're kind of fine, basically. Maybe the Ninja Bike version is one decent addition to maybe add in, especially the Headhunters Fury one. But this high-end tech tank is definitely getting changed to this. And overall, yeah, I'm not sure if this should stay on 60. We'll see what happens there. But it also isn't as overpowered as what we'll discuss in a second. As we also have the Gearset here, measured assembly. On the 2-piece, we're getting skill haste. On the 3-piece, repair skill, 60% of it, which is pretty, quite a bit. Then what we also have is receive 1 skill tier for each ally agent which that is within the high range of your Hive or Smart Cover. So actually in the patch notes, it only said for this part only Hive. But yeah, this Hive or Smart Cover, kind of pushing this gear set very much into having a Hive and Smart Cover, basically. Both of its kind of things work with that, because its other, as well, is that we get that skill tier whenever an ally is in there, but also while at skill tier 6, having at least 1 ally agent in the range of your Hive or Smart Cover for 4 seconds will grant overcharge for 15 seconds with a 40 seconds cooldown. And that this means basically that if there is any teammate in your team, for instance, here we are at 6 skill tier by ourselves. This should be basically ran in teams, of course. So that means that if we're in duos, I can just, and my teammate actually stays in my in my range of my skills. Although, of course, I can just kind of point them in the right direction with the Smart Cover with the next season. Smart Cover, of course, is not per se in this PTS. We can't use it in the open world and such. It is actually in Descent, and we'll kind of actually discuss it in a little bit in the miscellaneous parts. But depending on how many teammates I have, I could go with, up to 3 cores, basically being red cores. In this case, even 4, because we have Technician giving us 1. And then as well, the overcharge, if you're at skill tier 6, you basically don't need, if that takes you to skill tier 6 with 3 allies, basically, where we can have 3, basically more yellow cores than we normally could have. Because also it is ally, you yourself don't count as an ally, you don't like yourself, you hate yourself, it doesn't count. But allies are, in this case, specifically teammates. So yeah, you need teammates, first of all, for that skill tier to work. If you're with the 4-man, you can have basically, in this case, 4 red cores as well, meaning that we could lean into having quite a bit of damage, especially. Then, of course, yeah, with the capacitor, we would again both from the yellows and the reds, which seems kind of the way to lean with this, which is kind of like hybridizing it. And then as well, once they're all in there, it will overcharge for 15 seconds every 40 seconds, basically, if everybody's in there. And yeah, if they take it to 6, you don't need another person on top, basically, to take it kind of like 7, and then you overcharge. No. Once it reaches 6 and you meet the criteria of somebody is in your in that range, it will just basically trigger the overcharge after 4 seconds. As well, mortars and enemy skills that enter the range of your Hive or Smart Cover will be destroyed. Cooldown 30 seconds. This cooldown is 15% faster for each ally agent within the range of your Hive or Smart Cover. So we can get, for that final part, basically up to a 45% reduction to this 30-second cooldown. And then, of course, the question that right away comes up is, yeah, this is basically the thing of final measure, kind of, you know, measured assembly, final measure of Division 1. Mortars and enemy skills, what counts and what doesn't? It turns out that a lot of things counts. So for instance, any actual projectile that is fired, most of those will be affected by it. Although the grenades from grenade launchers, the airbursts and such aren't. Enemy skills, proxies, do they count? Yes. Mini tanks, do they count? Yes. Turrets and drones, or turrets and drones or such from enemies as well. Will they count? Yes. So it's not just enemy skills in the classic sense of it. Basically, it is basically all of their proxies, which actually, for instance, in effect for legendary missions, means that at that start where you have 3 DUA at DUA, you have 3 mini tanks. You toss this at them, one of them deconstructs instantly, basically. So, and if that stays there, because the enemies will likely not per se shoot at it, and it doesn't also need to be a healing hive or such, of course, it can be a singer hive, but you delete one of them, depending on your cooldowns, and then here as well, for instance, the backpack talent actually reduces that cooldown, the base of it, from 30 to 15. That's why I'm running the backpack here. The chest actually reduces the cooldown of how quickly you can get the overcharge from 40 to 15. So basically every 25 seconds you can have, and you have 15 seconds of overcharge, and then you have the 25 seconds cooldown, which actually by itself also sounds pretty cool. Although the chest talent, yeah, I feel is less valuable. The backpack talent here, especially because I want the BTSU as well, because if we're taking a hive, a BTSU together with it is actually quite, you know, quite standard. And then we can even supercharge with this and give a group-wide overcharge every 2 minutes. And then also, yeah, we still have our own overcharge. But that's especially, yeah, that part of this where this will delete things like that is actually pretty powerful. Especially in, yeah, for instance, that section. Now, I think we'll find a bunch of uses for this in certain places, because especially there, for instance, if we can just, if 3 people are running this, they all 3 put out a hive, deleting all of the, or actually, well, even for instance, in the garage, for instance, in DUA, where this could delete drones coming towards you and such, and also, you know, the mini tanks if they get into the range of it. Also, you will overcharge intermittently if you're doing it right, because once we have the smart cover as well, we can toss the hive at the enemy and keep the smart cover towards our allies. That is kind of what I'm thinking with it. And of course, the smart cover as well has very big benefits for allies. You could even actually fire the smart cover at enemies, because yeah, it is at its core and sticky. That is also what it was in Division 1. You can actually fire it at a distance at cover. But what if you fire it at a mini tank? That is kind of in your way. It isn't warhounds. It is specifically basically proxies. All of the things that Headhunt or Heartbreaker does not stack against, basically is all those things. So with that is actually pretty powerful. We can actually get skill tiers from it, especially with the capacitor. That is actually really strong, because we can have red cores and we can gain skill tiers from this. Now, of course, not striker strong. Of course not, but pretty strong for a build that has this much utility with it as well. Because yeah, being able to just have your hive kind of out, and then it kind of catches, you know, drones coming your way. You can kind of get mini tanks kind of going away, sniper turrets and such. All of those things have quite a bit of value. Even leaving it, for instance, if the group is kind of huddled up on a healing hive, any of those RC cars from hyenas or something, when they get near, they just get deconstructed. They do still blow up, so that is actually important, for instance, for those RC cars, because yeah, you might still get hit by them. Overall, I think there's a bunch of creative things we'll find with this gear set. At its core, though, is this like the new healer? No, the FI buff is just way too good overall. Could this be used, especially in some parts of, for instance, the raids and such? I think there might be, because some things in there that are super annoying might be actually counterable by this. Could we even run it as a full red and maybe have future perfect, and then take this up a little bit, and then we take a few skill tiers here, we get a few skill tiers from allies, and then we kind of are running a hive at 6 skill tiers and a smart cover, and just kind of being a buff and a heal and a little bit of damage for ourselves. I think that would be the good way to go. I'm looking forward to getting this one, the final version, with also all of the icons and stuff in place, because as I didn't say it before, it showing refactor here as its gear set. Yeah, that is placeholder. The graphics of it, though, are all in here, so we see the new ones. Overall, I'm kind of looking forward to playing around with this. Also, I can see the utility of this in PvP, in DZ, and in conflict to be, pretty useful. So yeah, we'll see kind of how that plays out. I've played around the least with this, so I'm kind of least informed on this one, but especially seeing it work against mini tanks and stuff gives me a lot of hope that this will actually work out well. Because lastly, except not leastly, because it is actually mostly, we have the new talent of the season, Streamline. So perfect Streamline here, increase weapon damage by 87%. That should already maybe send up some red flags. Definitely did for me. The first time hearing 87, that's quite a lot. Seems quite a lot. Is it quite a lot? We'll answer that in a second. And then the conditionality of it is when no skills are on cooldown. Now this, especially for how big of a bonus it is, we'll just do this, basically. But also, not cooldown is very specific. But first, let's actually say that the normal version is 80%. And of course, yeah, with it being 80% versus 87%, we're most of the way there with the normal version. So especially in the case of the LUD, which is the named AR version, versus the Purist, which is the named SMG version. The AR, the LUD, is a Mark 16 at its core. The Purist is an SMG 9A2, which is a much more meta weapon overall. The Mark 16 really isn't. A FAMAS or a Lexington with normal Streamline is going to be the pick overall. But the thing especially with Streamline is that cooldown is a very specific thing. And that is that, for instance, if I deploy my shield and my shield is out, this isn't on cooldown. Only when it gets destroyed, it goes on cooldown. Cooldown is specifically that, for instance, there that we saw where a skill has been used up and there is a bar basically moving across, especially if you have the marker turned on or the number turned on. So for instance, my decoy there is on cooldown. My decoy is deployed, not on cooldown. So I have the bonuses of our Streamline there already active. So I can have that out, I can have my shield out, and I can still have Streamline. Especially the shield, of course, yeah, a very strong tool, because also with the Streamline, we could basically put 4 cores on here, 4 blue cores on here, taking away basically, 4 times 15, 60. We still have a 20% bonus or more than that, basically, right, on weapon damage. We take a 4 blues, we take a powerful shield, and then we still have this 80% bonus. Because of the way that cooldown works, as well, for instance, a Revive Hive, when deployed, is not on cooldown. Now, of course, if you get downed with it, once you get downed with it, it will, of course, be on cooldown. But then maybe don't run it. But also, for instance, what you can do is even like have it deployed like this or anything. It also means that a turret and drone, while deployed, don't count for this. So yeah, actually for some of those hybrids, they go way above the capacitor's capacity to do damage. And then also, yeah, just in group settings, just, yeah, don't run a hive, maybe. Just, yeah, survive more, learn to survive, and then also if you get down, your teammates will pick you up. What you can do as well is, if you're running this, is that if you run, let's say, a LUD, and as a secondary, we run, let's say, something else. Although here we have the Tinker, we shouldn't do this, but we run a weapon when measured. When my hive's on cooldown, I swap to the measured one. Once my hive is off cooldown, I swap back to Streamline. Streamline at this number is way too high, because if we go and look at its numbers, so here we have the LUD with no talent, basically a Mark 16, with no damage talent specifically, basically, and then versus Streamlined. Streamline in this perfect version, basically at 87, and this is on red build because, of course, it's weapon damage, and it is just weapon damage. Because yeah, we can, with the checking numbers, we've checked that against in the game. It is weapon damage. This is on a grade 30 on a full red striker. So this is basically the worst case scenario, except if we were running furnace on top, basically. And there it is still a 33% increase. The normal version is at 30.7%, or well, the 30.77 increase over the normal version when it is active, or without, versus no talent. Now versus the kind of 20%ish when killer is active, which activates after a kill. If we kind of compare it to that, this is way more. If we compare it to like measured, which is more so in like the 13 to 17% depending on build, this is much more. This is sadist on call, basically. This is way too much. 87 this is more egregious than the original PTS Oreo. I will already, as I hear people say, I already like kind of hear it in my head of like, oh, no, just let us have fun, no nerfs and stuff like that. This isn't fun. This will take away, because we'll just all run this and then also not use skills, because plenty of people already don't use their skills at all. That shouldn't per se be encouraged, I feel, to begin with. But for plenty of people, this isn't conditionality except for their revive. And then, yeah, when you have the revive down, just you swap to a measured weapon for a little bit and then swap back. This is way too much for what it is, because this is in the range of sadist, which requires basically either a team member to be set up in a certain way or yourself to be set up in a certain way to kind of actually, for instance, OD can take advantage of sadist. If you're even a team member of an OD with certain weapons, you can, because if you're running LMG and you get half a mag and you're killing quite often, that can do well, especially if the OD is a good player and marking everybody. But in general play, you can't with an AR, because you're getting 25 rounds. You're much better off with a normal talent. This, though, you just don't use your skills and just have 30%. Now, just to not just highlight the issue, but also maybe offer up a solution. It is kind of behind my head, actually. I didn't realize that earlier. But we have here a field, and that is if stream is. So here we've taken the Lexington and the FAMAS. Both on the Lexington and the FAMAS is the same amount, because increase there, especially with the inters. But of course, the Lexington is going to outdo the FAMAS by quite a bit, or a little bit on burst, but quite a bit on sustain, especially because sustain is so much better. So we're taking the Lexington as kind of the top pick here. Here, if we have it on 35 weapon damage, then it is versus the no talent of the Lexington. So this isn't against the LUD, but this gray one is against the no talent Lexington. So if Streamline was basically a different number, if we play around with this 35, I feel for the perfect, having 40 and having that be a 15% total, because then at least there is still some conditionality to it. You can't use your skills and such. That already for me, for instance, I will likely run this at this number, just because it is that good of a talent, numbers-wise. But I will be annoyed by myself because I'm not using my pulse the whole time. And then for the normal version, if it is around 35, that is a 13-ish% increase on this. And then mostly because here we're running it at its worst. We're running a striker full red. Well, not its worst, but because we could have a Fenris chest. That would be worse for it. And we have 30 grading. We're as graded up as we can be. Because if we kind of take this to minus 60, kind of going all blue cores, but then still having the plus 30 grading, minus 60 as the input here. For the grade, that kind of gets us to, for instance, this being a 20% even on the space. And that's also the thing here, because this is a weapon damage talent. If it goes in as is, this is the default PvP talent, basically, because you just don't use your skills and you just use this. Like, it's worth it for how big of a difference it is. With this 20%, now we're kind of talking, because your skills are very valuable in PvP. You know, having, for instance, a fire sticky or EMP sticky or a drone or such deployed. Although, as well, the deflector drone, not like unless it gets destroyed, you don't lose the damage. When you deploy it, it's not on cooldown. So, especially for those kind of things, this is quite a big of an increase. So I feel 35 and 40, that's already kind of would make it already one of the top picks overall. It would also be one of the top picks because of its interaction with weapon damage, which, for instance, if you're not going with, let's say, Determined on a pistol or something, this is weapon damage. This goes into Headhunter. This increases your cap by quite a bit. And the skills, like on a sniping Headhunter, you deploy the drone, but it's not on cooldown, and then, you know, maybe you have the revive have or some other skill that you're like just not using, but you can still have that utility. On a pistol one, you can have your bulwark as long as it doesn't get destroyed, which, you know, especially with a few blue cores, it doesn't, and you make up for those blue cores with with the talent. And the other skill you just don't care, or just a decoy that you put out, it's not on cooldown. If this just was whenever you're using skills or something, I could see this, but especially with how it interacts with shields and stuff, this is way too much. This is egregious beyond the Oreo. Let's go and discuss some of the other miscellaneous items. And in this category, we do have actually some stuff that also actually wasn't in the patch notes. I should have kind of, I feel, put it in there. First of all, in the miscellaneous category, let's discuss that, yeah, there's no rebalances. Kind of started the video with that as well, but actually, just to reiterate, it's kind of sad that we aren't getting that. We weren't getting too many with seasons here and there, and then, of course, some bigger ones with like 2 seasons ago and last season, and then Project Resolves especially, of course, as well. I kind of get it, especially we are getting a DLC, so they are doing a lot of work. So, you know, they left out some rebalances and such, but yeah, it would have been nice to see. Then there is a rework actually to how watch points work. In effect, what is happening is that where it used to be per character and just tied to that character, how many points you had in scavenging, or well, in everything actually, that is no longer the case. It has now become account-wide in the same way that, for instance, account share resources would act, or in the case of our SHG level, that's just, you know, inherently account-wide. What that means is that if we spend 10 points here, when I spend this here, this is just spent on the account level now, instead of on the character level. So if I were to try to watch alt, basically, once I reach level 40, they just have the watch points of what the rest of the count has, no longer a full new amount. Now this, of course, has kind of started a shit show. let's call it what it is, as loud parts of the community are being loud once more. To me, this is a change that, well, this should have been implemented like this to begin with. It being an option to even watch alt never felt like intended. It would always have to be explained, you know, as its own thing, and also just completely made it so that resources did not matter, because why would I care if I need some titanium or printer filaments when I can do that, right? If I basically infinite amounts of that. And I feel that I feel I'm in a position as well to kind of talk about this being, I feel, a better change, because on main accounts, the account that is basically the bulk of the main build collection and such, the first 4 characters, or the 4 characters basically there, I do not have watch alts. I haven't had watch alts since season 3, or like even before that I did like 2 of them, but back then as well, they were much more annoying to get. On second and third account, I do use that, and especially as well, I've made several videos on it. I actually even kind of enjoy doing it, just going through the DDZ method here and there once in a while. What I didn't enjoy was when on third account, I reached a point around back when it was expertise 26 at max, I was on like 20 something, 21. I'd reached a point where especially we needed to go kind of, watch alting was the fast way at that point. And I did a ton of those, and I burned myself out almost. And I don't think that that was a good thing to even have as an option, because that is quite often what happens there. Now, with this as well, for one time, they're resetting us back to what we would have, basically accounts SHG level minus 800 as long as you're above 1k. Basically, how much you would have initially, or well, if you had never spent a scavenging point before. This is a one-time deal that we're getting at the end of this season, or well, at the start of next season to be specific. So what this also means for us is to spend all of your watch point that you currently have on all characters, just turn them into crafted pieces and such, turn them into the optimization resources and such. But you get a one-time reset. And from that point onwards, it will be account-wide. That means basically that watch alt-in, watch mule-in, as some call it, is no longer a thing. I'm all for that. If also we get economy changes. Because the one place where it isn't needed, because first of all, it isn't needed to do watch alting for expertise. I did the expertise on main account. As I said, I don't have watch alts. I didn't even spend that many watch points on it because I was using my watch points more so for SHG calibrations and field recons for all the optimizations and stuff like that of the build collection, and swapping builds and in and out and so much. I wasn't that interested in like spending it at all on expertise. But then I just ran so much. But of course, I'm in this kind of, I'm in a privileged position where I can play a lot. Not everybody has that amount of time. The developers should not expect that to be the go-to for it. But now that we don't have watch alts, they're kind of forced to, because now as well, for them, it wasn't a problem. It was basically like, watch alts exist, look at how many people are at expertise 28, or, next season we'll have 30. Look how many are at 30 right away. And it's a problem that you go like, oh, the players can go solve it themselves from a dev position. Now that is no longer an option. So they will have to do economy rebalances, and they've said that they are going to. Now, what those are going to be, we don't know yet. Those aren't part of this, and I actually don't think they're going to be part of this season. They are talking about events and such. And even having the expertise event kind of go multiple times in a season or something, I feel might be already enough to kind of mitigate it a little bit. But what I think they should do at some point, and especially now that we are also going to expertise 30, at some point they need to cap this. This is, at the very least, at 30, this needs to be capped. I wouldn't even be against them taking it back to 20 and capping it there. They do need to reimburse everybody for every point or every exotic spent over 20, or maybe even 25, maybe a lower number. Because then what that means is once you have done enough items to reach 20 or 25, you're done with expertise. You can do the other items as a completionist. If you really want to have the full set, you can go for that. But you don't need proficiency anymore, except if you want to have expertise on a newer item that maybe got added later, you need to proficiency it just to put expertise grading on it. I feel something like that needs to happen here, or at the very least, make it maybe 5 times. It wouldn't need to actually be that much. 5 times or such faster if you're running an item than if you're, for instance, keep the resources the same, donation-wise. Or maybe even help there a little bit. Make it so that if you're running the item, you go pretty quick. Make it whatever 3 contents give, maybe, for getting the item proficient. The time investment should be kind of commensurate to what you're getting out of it, which currently isn't. It is one of the longest grinds. I would say actually expertise is a longer grind than for instance, Descent. But yeah, we do have at least now going to account wide. And also to explain why that is even happening, they want to do a level 40 boost just so people will have access to their bot content, in this case of Brooklyn, because Brooklyn will only start at 40. Likely. I haven't played it, but I can guess if the boost is to level 40. Because of course what WONI was the original gateway from 30 to 40. You had to go through WONI to get to 40. Here, for people to kind of be able to start on Brooklyn, and for Brooklyn not to have to be scaled to every level and such, because I can imagine that requires a lot of testing, a lot of QA, which they just don't have the resources for. We see that in some things. You want to have a level 40 boost just so people can jump into the content that they bought or feel that they bought with Brooklyn. You can't have a level 40 boost together with, not doing anything about this. So they did do that. Some people are going, oh, but we didn't ask for the level 40 boost. Yes, but other players will. And also, this is also kind of the ripple effect of the other solution for this would have been seasonal characters. With seasonal characters, every season, a large part of the player base that already exists would be leveling up through the main, game basically again. There would be plenty of people to matchmake with and such, but of course, the loudest part of the community kind of were as shitty as they are trying to be about this and kind of killed that. If that system existed, this didn't need to exist because it wouldn't have mattered that much. People would have been leveling and there would be no reason per se to have a boost to 40. But yeah, there's basically, it's a ghost stat below 40 nowadays. And yeah, then you kind of need that boost, especially because otherwise too many people will kind of sign off. Yeah, let's go talk about actually a few other things. And yeah, as a final few, we'll go into actually a few items that are viewable already, like this caretaker here. Although this caretaker we don't actually have access to, but another we have actually. The two others, and these are from the DLC because yeah, as we talked here, these are all items that we discussed here were season items. We don't have actually any of the DLC items, which especially includes this the mask that we're gonna get, the catalyst. They already showed the talent on the video that they released. This is basically a somewhat status effect based as you're doing and receiving status effects, you get bonuses and such. It's actually an interesting looking item, and this will be part of the DLC. Same in here in the AR section, we have one caretaker. It isn't per se known specifically which talent this one is. We do also have the huntsman. This one we do know because it was actually on Cassie. And it being on Cassie kind of gives away as well what the source of it will be. They were talking about there being hunters in Brooklyn as well. So we'll have to take those down, and kind of Cassie having the item means basically it's the same as Shield Splinter and Hunter Killer. Once we get the item from the whatever crate we'll run into in there, Cassie will start selling it, kind of in the same way as the Shield Splinter. And the Huntsman, we know already that it is Perfect Frenzy. So it is Perfect Frenzy, an LMG talent that we normally don't have on ARs, on an AR. Now, this might sound very exciting to start off with. It turns out that it isn't that exciting. And that's down to that actually a thing that we just hadn't ran into until we kind of ran with this. Because I had one actually and was running around it because Cassie was available and she has it. It turns out that when you're running it, the firing time of a FAMAS is, and the reload is shorter than that 5 seconds of Frenzy. Now with, for instance, Sleipnir or other LMGs, we generally take an ammo pouch and such. The combined firing time, especially when Frenzy is active, the combined firing time plus reload is usually longer than 5 seconds. So the talent runs out, and then, you know, we hit the reload, complete the reload, that it triggers the Frenzy. Now though, with the AR actually firing, or well, this 50 round AR, especially fast firing one, then the reload, it isn't actually longer than the Frenzy. So there's a sliver of Frenzy remaining once you start firing again, then it runs out, and it doesn't auto-refresh. So as with a lot of talents, for instance, the Burnout with its talent, it doesn't actually refresh every time it gets triggered. It basically has to run out, and then a fresh one can be applied. And because of that, this item is actually kind of a non-starter. Even though it is one of the top ARs, it is one of the top talents in Frenzy, the combination of the two just does not work. So I'm hoping actually they address this. If this was maybe on the AUG, this could be enough firing time, especially with the reel or with the extended magazine, basically, or a higher magazine cap of that, together with its slower firing. You could get actually, you know, the Frenzy going kind of. Because I feel as well, putting a really good talent on FAMAS, yeah, would actually just be a top weapon. But in this case, it just turns out not to be. So yeah, we do have some of those items. One other one that we have as well is actually as we have screenshots of it here, the smart cover is actually available in the Scent, or was available in the Scent. You could actually pick it. You couldn't apparently pick it for the first one, which seemed to be the issue. And then you could actually pick it for subsequent picks. I didn't get to play with this. I'm using screenshots here provided by Cairo. Especially what we are seeing here. So on the right, we have the skill, especially with the visual. And then also we have a tier, it's being on tier 1 there. On tier 1, we're already getting plus 10 basically from damage to targets out of cover, and we're getting 20% damage to targets out of cover already at tier 1. And on the left, we have it at skill tier 6, 45 damage to targets out of cover. This alongside of Streamline is a little silly. Putting any amount of real like damage onto for weapons onto skills is already something, because you could definitely have the booster hive, for instance, in the past used to give a little bit of melee damage and such. That got removed because that could actually be abused basically. 45% from one skill at skill tier 6. This is the default thing for anyone that is at skill tier 6, because you might as well. For an FI or such, this is on top of the FI buff. Basically, you just trigger this somewhere, everybody bunches up, let's say in a raid, everybody huddles up in there. Everybody gets this 45%. The hive is enough to heal everybody anyway. This is way too much. Even at skill tier 1, because at tier 0, it's 10%. At skill tier 1, already it's 20%. That is already way too much, and then it goes 5% for each subsequent. That's how we get to this 45. That is silly amounts, especially when we kind of already look at it also giving 90 weapon handling. Like the 90 weapon handling by itself would already push me to use this. At skill tier 6, anything more than 10 here on DTOG is already making this the only skill that you kind of will have to go for red build. This is one way to get people to drop their shields and go with a different skill, but it's also maybe a little bit too much. And yeah, on that, we'll conclude this very long video, although there was a lot to discuss, and also, I'm rambly. We know that by now. Yeah, in the PTS, we do actually have this, at the chopper guy that normally takes you just to New York. We do have actually the battle for Brooklyn already somewhat the thing here. We can't go there if we just, here it asks us to go to shop, that just errors out. But yeah, Battle for Brooklyn on the horizon, especially, of course. And yeah, as a reminder again, these were all items of the season. These will be available for anybody as well that doesn't get Brooklyn. The season will happen by itself. Brooklyn is a DLC. We can go there, kind of like Woni nowadays. You don't have to own Woni to kind of have all the items. And of course, as well, Battle for Brooklyn will have its own items. Although, for instance, the smart cover we were discussing is going to be part of this. Yeah, so overall, we do have a bunch of interesting stuff. I'm looking forward to using especially the Tinkerer. I feel there is a lot of utility to be had there, or even damage. And it is an interesting talent. The Pakhan and the Nimble, kind of, I think especially the Nimble, we might find some uses for. The Pakhan, just the Bullet King exists. It needs more, and hopefully it'll maybe get something more, because as well, PTS, everything is subject to change, and we might see changes. And I do hope that we see changes to Streamline, especially, and that smart cover. Both of those, numbers-wise, are just way too high. I kind of like the way that they're, as they're set up. Streamline, for instance, yeah, forcing players to maybe not use their skills, although forcing, for some players, that's just how to play. But especially the smart cover alongside of that just being, that high, even at low tiers, is a little bit too much. So I hope both of those gets altered down. I hope actually, yeah, the Pakhan maybe moves up a little bit. And yeah, Imminence Armaments and the Gearset, both actually, well, Imminence Armaments, I feel, will go into a bunch of builds. I think 50 pistols will make more sense than 60 overall. But overall, it's definitely usable. It doesn't also kind of, it's not game breaking anyway, not to the degree that Streamline or the smart cover. The Gearset actually looks interesting. We won't really see its full effect, or we can't even test it to its full effect until we have the smart cover, because it is integral to it. Having the ability to basically use the hive maybe offensively, and then have the smart cover be the defensive part of it, that will work out pretty well. So yeah, tentatively looking forward to the season. I actually even am in favor of the watch all changes, as we kind of discussed. There is still, though, that, yeah, a bunch of stuff needs to get fixed. First of all, the discussion, for instance, on Streamline and the smart cover, that can be a discussion. it cannot be a discussion that we can have double sadist on OD with Tinkerer. That should just get fixed. Name talents should not work for it, because currently as well, basically all name talents work there. So they do need to fix that. They do need to fix as well that the modifiers in the modifier system, the yellow with the gadget, the numbers are just off. As well, actually, some of the numbers are misrepresented by being multiplied by 2 instead of a 200% increase, which they likely intended because it's a multiplied by 3 instead for a few of those places. So, and actually all of the modifiers are kind of set up in this way. But yeah, I think we are gonna go into a pretty fun season, if nothing else as well. The DLC is coming. I'm as hyped as I'm gonna be, but that's of course not in comparison to some. I'm not one for just yet jumping around for joy. And also, yeah, it might still suck. We don't know till we know. And yeah, I am looking forward to it, though. I am optimistic for our future. So yeah, if you did enjoy this very, very long video, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. It does help out. So I'll do that a little bit of shilling here. In the future, we are going to go do that refactor build showcase that that this replaced, of course, as yeah, the PTS kind of came out of nowhere, at least for me. I was expecting it actually a few weeks after this, but we got it pretty early, so that's actually good. So yeah, that'll come in the future. And as always, have a good night.